Tonight at 10, NHS workers in England consider strike action after the government suggests a 1% pay rise. Nurses say it's an insult after a year on the front line of the pandemic.
I thought this time would prove how valuable we were to the system and stuff like that, but I feel like that hasn't been translated with this tool.
The Health Secretary says he recognised the incredible work of NHS staff, but the pandemic has put a strain on public finances.
Elsewhere in the public sector, there's a pay freeze in place, and we've proposed what we think is affordable.
Also on the programme tonight, a mystery sixth person who arrived in the UK and tested positive with the concerning Brazilian COVID strain has been found in South London after a 5-day search. Portugal and Cyprus say they would welcome back vaccinated British tourists from May once travel restrictions are lifted here.
As an adult who lived a really independent life, to then go into this construct.
Of Sussex says royal life wasn't as she expected and she now feels liberated.
And coming up in the sport on BBC News, a sprint finish from Amy Eloise Markov in the 3,000 metres saw her claim the first British gold at the European Indoor Championships.
Good evening. 2 unions representing tens of thousands of healthcare workers are warning of possible strike action after the government suggested a 1% pay rise for most NHS workers in England. It has been branded an insult and hypocrisy in its greatest form by healthcare workers, but the government insists 1% is all it can afford at a difficult time for public finances. Around 1 million other public sector staff, including teachers, the armed forces, firefighters and police officers, are about to have their pay frozen for a year. From Westminster, our deputy political editor Vicky Young sent this report.
The COVID pandemic's taking its toll on NHS staff.
Definitely undervalued is, I think, what a lot of people are feeling now.
The government suggesting a 1% pay rise.
Really sad, just very disappointed.
Alice and Ella, just 2 of the many nurses dismayed at today's news. And it's raising awkward questions for ministers. Health Secretary, you stood at that podium in May last year and said that nursing deserved fair reward. Is a 1% rise fair?
Elsewhere in the public sector, there's a pay freeze in place, and we've proposed what we think is affordable to make sure that in the NHS people do get a pay rise. I bow to nobody in my admiration for nurses. In fact, I learned that at the knee of my grandmother, who was a nurse.
The independent pay review body will look at a range of NHS workers' pay, including nurses. Their starting salary is almost £25,000. The government says newly qualified nurses have had a 12% rise over the last 3 years. The Royal College of Nursing says a nurse with average experience will be earning over £30,000.
I think just a deep sense of worry, really.
But for Holly, it's the future that worries her. The NHS won't return to normal for a long time.
We're demoralised, we're exhausted, we're fed up, and now I think people are actually quite angry and deeply, deeply worried for our patients. We know that waiting lists are incredibly high at the moment, and there's a big concern of how we're going to manage things when 1 in 3 nursing staff want to quit.
NHS Scotland has given staff an interim pay increase of 1%, backdated to December, ahead of full pay negotiations soon. As in Wales, staff also received a £500 bonus. But in England, one nursing union has set up a strike fund in case they decide on industrial action. This was some of the reaction in Birmingham over the pay row.
I think at this time we really need to be supporting the NHS and the nurses in particular, who've done an absolutely amazing job.
They've had a bad experience and they deserve a lot more than that.
In terms of strike action, I can see why they want to do it. It's probably not the best time to do it. I don't think they'd carry much favour with the public.
Economics in this country are as bad as they've ever been. So overall, it's better than nothing. They deserve something. So it's an offer which I feel should be accepted without the threat of a union strike.
Others have also worked through this pandemic, but most public sector workers will have their pay frozen. The Labour leader says they all deserve a rise.
The freeze on public sector pay is wrong. We've challenged the government on it. I challenged them in the budget response on it, and we'll continue to challenge them on it.
So you want pay rises for everyone, you don't want any tax rises. Is that financially responsible?
We have to have a plan for the future to rebuild the foundations of our country. You don't do that by freezing the pay of those on the front line throughout this pandemic, public sector workers.
The NHS response to this pandemic prompted an outpouring of gratitude from the public. And the decisions ministers make now over how staff are rewarded will be scrutinised extremely closely. Well, 4 unions have tonight written to the Chancellor asking him to reconsider this proposal. He, though, says this must be considered in the wider context of the hit that there has been on the economy. Now, NHS pay is a motive at the best of times, let alone during a pandemic. But I think both sides will have to consider carefully their next steps. Unions looking at strike action and ministers who won't want to be on the wrong side of public opinion on this. But if they are, they're going to have to calculate just how much political pain it's going to cause them.
Vicky Young, thank you. Well, the latest government figures show there were 5,947 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, the lowest since the end of September. 236 deaths have been recorded in the last 24 hours. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID test. The total number of deaths so far across the UK is 124,261. As for the latest vaccination figures, more than 376,000 people had their first dose of a vaccine in the latest 24-hour period. So, in total, more than 21 million have now had their first jab. That's 40% of the adult population. A mystery sixth person who was infected with the concerning Brazilian coronavirus variant has been found following a 5-day search. The individual, who lives in Croydon in South London, had been quarantining at home. The news comes as COVID infection rates continue to fall across the UK. The number of deaths is falling sharply too. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, says the link from new cases to hospitalisations to deaths is now being broken because of the vaccine. Our health correspondent Catherine Burns reports.
This mystery started when authorities found 6 people in the UK who tested positive for a worrying variant of coronavirus linked to Brazil. But they'd only actually found 5 of them. The last person hadn't registered their test properly. A team started trying to track them down, narrowing it down to 10,000 people and then a few hundred.
At this point, enhanced contact tracing kicked in, with call handlers calling, emailing and phoning all of the individuals that could have received a test in that time interval. These calls narrowed it down to 27 individuals.
Now we know the person had recently flown back from Brazil, lives in Croydon in South London and had quarantined at home. There will be extra testing in the area to make sure it's not spread any further. Another positive development, figures from the Office for National Statistics show how far cases have fallen since this lockdown started. They suggest that at the start of the year, about 1 in 50 people across the UK would have tested positive for coronavirus. By the end of January, cases had fallen to 1 in 65. And now another drop to 1 in 230 people.
Schools going back is the first step towards things opening up, and authorities will be keeping a close eye to see what kind of impact it has. One possibility is that the fall in infections will begin to slow down. Another is that new cases could begin to rise, potentially pushing up the R number, how the virus spreads, up by 30%.
But the vaccine rollout means that wouldn't necessarily be such a huge problem. Until now, high infection levels have inevitably meant high numbers in hospital and then a high death toll. But as the vaccines have more impact, that link is being broken. And so 9 weeks since the start of term, an end to homeschooling in England. Lucy Fernyhough's been doing lessons with her children, Astrid and Albie. Now it's over and it's fair to say they've got mixed feelings.
Albie, it's the end of homeschool.
No, I don't want to go back to school.
What I'm most excited about is being able to see my teachers and friends again and being able to play with them.
Slightly nervous about everyone going back next week, a little bit apprehensive to be honest. This has been a strange time.
So what's this question?
But no matter if they're reluctant or desperate to get back, primary and secondary school children in England will be swapping the kitchen table for the classroom on Monday. The rest of the UK will take things more slowly. Catherine Burns, BBC News.
Both Cyprus and Portugal say they hope to welcome vaccinated British tourists from May, when travel restrictions might be lifted in England. It's not clear how vaccine status would be proved, though. Meanwhile, from Monday, anyone leaving England will have to fill out a form to say why they're travelling. Our transport correspondent Caroline Davis reports.
The run-through well before the runway. While many of EasyJet's planes aren't going to carry passengers yet, many are stored on the tarmac, waiting.
50, 40, 30.
Staff training has continued during the pandemic, putting pilots in simulators.
Face masks are required to be worn at all times.
And cabin crew through mock scenarios. While airports sit almost empty. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are yet to set a date on when international travel might return, but the Prime Minister's roadmap for England means that things are already starting to change here in Gatwick.
Since the announcement, we've started work on returning all our colleagues back to work. The timescales around bringing the numbers of people back and the volumes of equipment and restarting the infrastructure, it takes time. It's not something that can be switched on overnight.
The industry is desperate to welcome passengers back up the steps and into international travel again. But the question is, where will they be going to? How do other countries feel about having British tourists back? Some are already working on their plans. Cyprus has announced that they'll welcome British tourists as soon as the UK will allow them to go.
Everybody is going to be able to fly from the UK to Cyprus as long as they have the necessary tests. And no matter what the case, there will be no quarantines, unless, of course, you test positive when you get here.
They say that vaccinated British travellers can come to Cyprus without a test at all from May, if the UK allows them to fly. Portugal is currently on the UK's red list, meaning anyone arriving from there in the UK has to go into hotel quarantine at their own expense. But the tourism minister is optimistic about May too.
For the time being, non-essential travel needs to be restricted, but we do believe that Portugal will soon allow restriction-free travel, not only for vaccinated people, but for those that are immune or test negative. And that will happen soon, a couple of months, maybe May, early May. We'll have everything ready to enable British people to come and visit the country, for sure.
Going on holiday is still illegal, and from Monday, anyone travelling will have to carry a form which says their trip is permitted. There are no government guarantees that trips to Cyprus, Portugal or any other country will be possible from the 17th of May. After a year of crushingly low passenger numbers, the industry is holding its breath and hoping that the summer will save them. Caroline Davis, BBC News.
More than 1 million NHS workers have now had the COVID vaccine in England, but there are still tens of thousands who haven't. London in particular stands out. More than 20% of staff are yet to have their first jab, while in other parts of England, nearly all have had it. Now the government is looking at whether COVID vaccination should be made compulsory for all health workers. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, reports.
Jestem z Polski. Miałam szczepienie na COVID-19.
It's a vaccine promotional video with a difference. An NHS trust reaching out to its own staff via social media in a range of languages. Here at Hampshire hospitals, they're preparing for the next consignment of vaccine doses. 90% of staff have had their first dose, and management are trying to talk to the others who still haven't had a jab.
We're making sure that we're having individual conversations with people who haven't had it to really understand why. And if it is around misinformation, we're making sure that we correct that.
The doctor's given me this. Do I need it?
3 senior staff are working as vaccine champions, and they're addressing the concerns they hear. They're working with colleagues at the 3 hospitals in the trust.
It's not just our diverse communities that have had concerns about the vaccine. There are the other non-BAME communities as well, but also our Eastern European contacts and colleagues have also expressed some concerns in a similar fashion. But we're trying to share the message that it is safe that I've had the vaccine myself. I'd recommend my family to take the vaccine.
Ministers are now actively reviewing whether vaccination should be compulsory for NHS staff. It'll be a tricky decision. They'll have to weigh up boosting public confidence, but also whether such a move would alienate or antagonise staff. A GP at a surgery in Hereford wrote to her local MP saying it was her personal choice not to have the vaccine and she'd quit if she was made to have it. One nurse at a different practice who didn't want to be identified told me why she wouldn't be vaccinated.
If I'm vaccinating people, I am at risk myself of getting COVID, and that's my responsibility.
Senior health leaders are saying it's your professional responsibility and other NHS staff to have the vaccine.
They can say that, but to me that would be against my human rights. It's forcing me into doing something where I should be able to make my own decision.
Dr. Monica Allaby is a GP in Luton running extra vaccination clinics for local people. A couple of her practice staff have been hesitant, but she says persuasion is the answer, not compulsion.
There has to be dialogue, and you have to trust sort of the local leaders to deal with this rather than mandating it from the top. It can have unintended consequences. We don't want to lose staff. We don't want to lose people from the NHS. We are struggling with workforce as it is.
Vaccination rates amongst care home staff are lower than in the NHS. The review will consider that and the calls which have been made for further intervention. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The Duke of Edinburgh has been transferred back to London's King Edward VII Hospital following his successful heart procedure this week. Prince Philip, who's 99, was taken by ambulance from St Bartholomew's Hospital, where he underwent the procedure for a pre-existing condition on Wednesday. A soldier has been killed during a training accident at the Castlemartin firing range in Pembrokeshire. The BBC understands the soldier, who has not yet been named, was a sergeant in the Welsh Guards and died during a live fire training exercise last night. For some of the most deprived areas in England, January was the deadliest month since the pandemic began. One town that has suffered greatly is Burnley in Lancashire. In January, deaths from all causes were 60% higher in Burnley than the average in England, according to analysis by Manchester University. The government says it is committed to reducing deprivation and has spent more than £100 billion on welfare support during COVID. Our special correspondent Ed Thomas reports.
We thank you for the lives.
This is now a weekly routine.
We thank you for the love.
In Burnley, COVID and lockdown have taken the heavy toll on the poorest.
Amen. 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 And my days are full, dealing with the torment, the death, the tears. People don't really see it. It's unreal.
For some of the most deprived areas, January was the deadliest month since the pandemic began.
And Lord, we pray that Grace's face, her memory.
Today's prayers are for Grace. Her mental health suffered terribly during lockdown.
She was 28, everything going for her. And I feel like I've failed her now.
No. A family desperate for comfort. A mum, Nana, and son.
Never going to see his children. Yeah. Never going to see him get married.
He's been so brave, but he's trying to be brave for us.
What do you want to happen?
I just bring her back and tell her never to go. Just stay with me. I mean, I'm only 10, I'm too young.
Donations are paying for Grace's funeral.
I was saying, Mum, where can I get the money from? I can admit I was suicidal, I just didn't...
Without Nick's help, what would have happened to Grace?
She'd have been in a pauper's grave. She'd have just gone in with people she didn't know.
It's becoming more and more and more obvious that there's a growing number of people that are too poor to die. It's about dignity, this.
It's too late for Janet to claim some of that dignity.
It's a funeral, but we know body. Even though he won't be there, he's there in our hearts, you know?
Kevin had acute respiratory problems. His health got worse during the pandemic.
He couldn't walk, he didn't even know me.
Were you asking for help?
We kept asking him, saying we wanted carers in, but we didn't get nowhere.
How old were you when he passed away?
56.
She had no money to collect her husband's body, so he'll be cremated by the hospital.
When they've done it, they're going to ring me and tell me, and then I have to get somebody to go over for his ashes to fetch him back.
Do you know when that's going to happen?
No.
I'm seeing the consequences of lockdown. I'm doing funeral after funeral after funeral after funeral of people that don't have the finances and support. And we've come together to grieve for Kevin.
And now this is Pastor Mick's church. A closed down gym, another casualty of the pandemic. But it's here Janet, her family, can say goodbye.
We can express our love and our grief.
I appreciate doing it this way. At least it's getting a send-off, and all family can be there.
And it's goodwill and charity that's gifted Grace's family this day.
These people are not statistics.
Oh, God.
You can. They hurt, they bleed, they cry.
Mum, don't leave me. I just want you in my life forever.
These children, they're losing their parents. They're not numbers on a board. And I want their stories to be told because this should not be happening.
That report by Ed Thomas. Now, Pope Francis is on the first ever papal visit to Iraq amid tight security. The country's small Christian community has faced persecution and been subjected to terror attacks in the past. Mark Lowen reports.
Still masked, but no longer grounded. Pope Francis's first trip since COVID, his riskiest of all, a perilous pilgrimage to Iraq in the grip of a pandemic. On the first ever papal visit here, he told me he was very happy, calling it special. Beneath the pomp is a significant message, dialogue between faiths and support for persecuted Christians. No open-top Pope-mobile here. In a country torn by conflict, an outstretched hand through an armoured car was all most will see. But less protection from the other danger here, the pandemic. Little social distancing and few masks are what's worrying many. After a meeting with the President, the Pope called for an end to extremism.
Solo se riusciamo a guardarci tra noi.
Only if we learn to look beyond our differences and see each other as members of the same human family, will we be able to begin an effective process of rebuilding.
For Iraq's dwindling Christians, it's like a salvation.
Viva Papa Francis!
Hanan, who named her son after Pope Francis, has watched as much of her community were killed or forced to flee. We've been dreaming of this visit day and night, she says. We must stop the bloodbath and we must stay in Iraq. The risk is that the symbolic importance of this trip is overshadowed by COVID concerns and that it becomes a super spreader. But a defiant Pope Francis believes this nation has waited long enough for a papal visit and that there is no time to lose to bring a message of peace and hope to Iraq. Mark Lowen, BBC News, Baghdad.
A group representing the main loyalist factions in Northern Ireland says the creation of an EU customs border under the Brexit deal undermines the union with Britain and, as a result, has withdrawn support for the Good Friday peace agreement. The Belfast Agreement brought to an end a conflict that claimed over 3,500 lives. The loyalist move comes amid a row this week over trading rules and a wider push for a referendum on Irish unity from the main nationalist party, Sinn Féin. Fergal Keane has been gauging reaction amongst unionists.
The echoes of the past are being summoned forth. The old fear of the union broken, of being sold out to the Catholic South.
In our province, we say never, 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 never.
But the troubles have ended. The power of the Catholic Church has faded away. The southern government speaks of respecting unionist fears.
I don't believe the future of the island of Ireland is about majoritarianism in the crudest sense. I think it's about consensual relationships, trust.
He sort of gets it, you know, he gets it.
But soothing words don't reassure loyalist politician Billy Hutchinson, who feels Irish nationalism is advancing against divided unionists. He served 15 years in jail for murdering 2 Catholics during the Troubles, but later became an advocate of the peace process. More than 20 years after the peace agreement, it's a measure of enduring mistrust here that for him Irish unity would mean victory for Sinn Féin, the party that spoke for the IRA.
If we were to live in a 32-county Ireland, I would imagine some of that power would be decentralised, and if that power was decentralised to an Ulster where it was 6 counties or 9 counties, we would feel persecuted, because the people who would have the power would be Sinn Féin.
I think I am right in saying we are the most loyal part of Great Britain.
But 100 years after the foundation of a unionist-ruled Ulster at the heart of the British Empire, that world has been changed by the Troubles, by demographics, and global transformation.
Belfast, city of 1,000 launches, topped all previous...
The industrial muscle of the unionist working class is gone, memorialised in popular art. Where thousands once laboured to build ships like Titanic, Amazon now employs dozens. In this time of change, I wondered what a younger generation of unionists might feel about the prospect of a united Ireland. Sarah Crichton is a lawyer, left-wing in her politics and avowedly pro-union.
I don't know where I fit in. Where do I fit in a united Ireland? You know, I'm British and I'm Irish as well, but it is something that worries me. It worries me, I guess, not so much the idea of it happening, though obviously I don't want it to happen. It's that it happens and we've no plan, we don't know what it's going to look like.
There's no physical frontier on the island anymore. But among many rural Protestants, the long memory of killing has left deep wounds. This is the Orange Hall at Altnavay, 3 miles from the border. A frequent target of vandalism, it has a beleaguered air. 6 Protestants were murdered here at the time of Ireland's partition 100 years ago. And this 15 minutes drive away is King's Mills, scene of a more contemporary massacre. 10 Protestant workmen were lined up by the roadside and shot dead by the IRA in 1976. It was a sectarian retaliation for the killing of local Catholics.
Kenny Wharton hid 2 wee girls, they were only toddlers.
Alan Black was the only survivor.
And that was his whole world.
What comes back, if I can ask you?
My 18-year-old apprentice screaming for his mummy, and a gunman coming over and blowing his face away. And he was shouting, "Mummy, mummy, mummy." That comes back. That comes back often.
With all this talk of a border poll, I've met people, and I met a lot of Protestants who are unsettled, fearful of what might be coming. What do you feel about it?
I'm not fearful. If a border poll, well, it's like everything else, like Brexit or anything else. Whoever votes for it will get it. I'm a unionist by nature, but I'll take whatever is voted on, whatever the vote is.
A poll isn't imminent and predicting a result not possible. But there's no certainty that the ties which defined their identity will endure for the generations to come. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Belfast.
The Duchess of Sussex says it's liberating now that she can speak for herself again. In a clip released ahead of her interview with Oprah Winfrey, she suggested life within the royal family was not what she had expected. Daniela Ralph reports.
Would you please give me an interview? And you said...
For 3 years, Oprah Winfrey has pursued this interview.
Finally, we get to sit down and have this conversation.
Well. For the Duchess of Sussex talking to Oprah, a sign that the restrictions of royal life have lifted.
it's really liberating to be able to have the right and the privilege in some ways to be able to say yes.
And to
I'm
say
ready
it
to
for
talk.
yourself.
To say it for
and
yourself.
not to have to consult with anybody at this point.
Yeah, to be able to just make a choice on your own and just be able to speak for yourself.
That destroys.
Meghan and Harry are just the latest in a long line of high-profile confessionals.
When people make up stories that I don't want to be who I am, it hurts me.
Many in the sports world.
Oprah Winfrey got cyclist Lance Armstrong to finally come clean.
Yes or no? Did you ever take banned substances to enhance your cycling performance?
Yes.
How hurtful was it?
And she's previously persuaded royalty to bare their soul.
It was so hard because the last bride up that aisle was me.
My show brings you the latest news.
News anchor and war correspondent Christiane Amanpour has been interviewed by Oprah Winfrey. She says her interview style is perfect for drawing out royal revelations.
There's been a bit of chat that perhaps she isn't going to be the most challenging interviewer for Harry and Meghan, particularly because there is a sort of friendship, a personal friendship there. But I wonder if that's underestimating Oprah a bit.
She's not an investigative reporter. She's not a pit bull. She's not massively aggressive. But if you look back and see the interviews she's done, Oprah has been able to get the answers. And I think it's unfair to suggest that sitting down with her for 2 hours is an easy ride.
Going to the show!
Oprah Winfrey is a media powerhouse. For 25 years, The Oprah Winfrey Show was a phenomenon, the most watched chat show in TV history.
We're going to take a break.
She is now a media executive, worth an estimated £1.8 billion. And that Oprah brand provides Meghan and Harry with an influential platform.
Oprah is the most powerful woman in America. She's also the wealthiest Black woman in America. It's great for them to be aligned with her because she can really give a lot of guidance to them in navigating life as public figures in America.
You want a D-list? We're going to give you A-list.
Oprah Winfrey was a guest at Harry and Meghan's wedding, so there will be a familiarity to this interview. The timing is also sensitive, with the Duke of Edinburgh still in hospital and royal relationships strained. But Oprah is an expert at dealing with family dramas. Daniela Ralph, BBC News.
Newsnight's coming up on BBC Two. Here's Kirsty.
Exactly a year since the first recorded death from COVID here, a Newsnight special asks why the UK was so badly hit, how we move forward and rebuild, and what memorials we should create to those who've died. Join me in a few minutes on BBC Two.
And that's it from us. Good night.